Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the time Senator Hatch used be counted retroactively against the time in opposition to my amendment number 2127.
Without objections, so ordered.
President,
Senator from Wyoming.
speaking on this amendment, I appreciate the concern and the interest and the effort that the senator from Illinois has gone to on this bill. But in looking at it, there's still a couple of steps that are missing if this were to become law. Yes, it would provide a lot of information to the FDA. It would, in fact, flood them with information. And I think it would flood them with more information than they could possibly process. But that part doesn't even bother me. What bothers me is, how do you get that information to the consumer? It's the consumer that needs to know what they're drinking, eating, everything else, and that's why we provided labeling on a lot of things. But even the things that we already provide labeling on, the consumer doesn't necessarily pay attention to it. And probably the people that need to pay the most attention to it don't pay any attention to it. And so just making this information available to the FDA doesn't get it to the point where the consumer can know. And of course, anytime we start talking in this area, people get really worried about the amount of regulation that we put on things that they consider to be very important to them and to do no harm. So I think the right way to address this important issue would be for the HELP Committee to conduct hearings and to work together, as we've done on this bill, to find common ground on the policy. And when we find common ground, like we have on this FDA bill, then we can get something done. But I think this is a little bit premature, so I hope that people would not support this amendment at this time. I yield the floor and reserve the balance of our time.
Mr. President, how much time?
The senator from Ohio.
How much time is remaining on this amendment?
7 minutes in favor of the amendment.
Mr. President, I just want to say, first of all, I have the greatest respect, as he knows, for the senator from Illinois. He is one of the true consumer champions in the entire Congress and has been for all of his time here. And so it's kind of hard to argue against Senator Durbin when he is such a champion of consumers. But on this issue, I think we've part a little company. I want to make it very clear that that under DSHEA already, supplement labels must disclose their ingredients. Must disclose their ingredients. Even when a product is reformulated, if the supplement contains new ingredients, then the label must reflect that change. These were all added, that we added for consumer protection. Now, again, it's not as though FDA doesn't know what's out there. Under current law, supplement manufacturers have to biannually register their stuff. There's a biannual registration requirement right now. So that really the concern is that the agency, FDA, just doesn't have the resources to do anything. I've tried Senator knows he's on the Appropriations Committee to get more funds for the FDA to do this, but we haven't been able to do it. To get the funds necessary for the FDA to even do what job they're supposed to do now. And I repeat for emphasis' sake, every FDA commissioner, those appointed by Democratic presidents or Republican presidents, have said that the DSHEA gives them adequate authority to keep dangerous products off the shelves. So the authority is already there. What FDA needs is the resources. That's money, and that's appropriations. And quite frankly, I don't see that happening this year, that we're going to give them anything more. We're just going to give them more of a burden to do, and I think it's going to give a false sense of security to people, because FDA simply won't be able to do this. Lastly, as the senator did say, we do have a voluntary registration program of ingredients and stuff with the Office of Dietary Supplements at the National Institute of Health. So that's already there. That, coupled with the biannual reporting requirements, plus the fact that every dietary supplement has to have the ingredients listed on the label. So there's plenty of consumer protections out there. It's just that you can't protect a consumer who doesn't want to follow directions, who doesn't want to follow the guidelines that are listed on the labels themselves. I don't know how you protect people from that. Sometimes you just have to continually tell people, follow the directions. If you follow the directions, you'll be fine. So that's why I think this amendment is ill-timed. I said to the senator, and I mean this, I said it with a senator from Utah, our committee would be more than happy to have hearings on this, again, to flesh it out a little bit more and to see just what might be possible. But I come down to this. Bottom line, the FDA needs more money and they need more personnel to do this job. I yield the floor.
How much time is remaining on the amendment?
7 minutes
On my side?
on your side.
And any time remaining on the opposite?
1 minute.
1 minute. Well, let me just say, and I respect the senator from Iowa. He and I work on so many things, and the senator from Wyoming as well. They're two excellent colleagues, good people, and this is a tough bill, and the underlying bill is a masterpiece of bipartisan accomplishment that they can both be proud of. What I'm saying here about dietary supplements is no reflection on you, Senator Harkin or Senator Enzi. This is an industry which I've been watching for a long, long time for a variety of reasons. And I would say the argument that Senator Enzi made that merely disclosing the label, ingredients, and name of the product to the FDA doesn't get the information to the consumer really argues for a much bigger amendment than I'm offering. It argues for a website and access and so forth, and I understand that going in. I agree with Senator Harkin. It's an overreach in this time of budgetary problems. I wish we could do it. I think we should. I think we have an obligation to. But I didn't put it in here because I knew the first thing they'd say was, we can't afford it. We went to the FDA and said, do you want this information? They said, not only do we want it, we've already publicly stated we want it in reply to the GAO report. And we said, can you handle it if we send you the basic information of the products presently being sold? They said yes. Now, you can go further and say more can be done. That calls for a bigger role of government than even this amendment suggests. But how do you argue? How do you argue when the Institute of Medicine tells us there are 1,000 new products a year coming in called dietary supplements on the shelves all across America in stores and drugstores where families and children are walking in buying them? How do you argue that we don't want to know you're here? We don't want your Chinese product that just made it to the shelf in Springfield, Illinois, to register with the FDA before you do business here? How do you make that argument? Wouldn't you assume as a consumer, a family member, when you walk in the store, that somebody somewhere knows this company exists, that this product exists? Right now, they don't. The only disclosure to the government is voluntary, and as I said, about 1 out of 10 companies volunteer the information. That, to me, is not the way to protect consumers. Why do we need this information? Simply said, when an ingredient turns out to be dangerous, we want to know if that ingredient is in more than one product and go after it to protect American consumers. If you don't know the products in the United States and you don't know the ingredients, how are you going to find that out? Wouldn't we want that basic information? God forbid something happens with one of these products, someone loses their life, like this poor young woman in Hagerstown, Maryland, drinking that Monster energy drink, 2 of them. She had 2 of them and it killed her. Cardiac arrest. God forbid that happens again and we say, you know, we didn't even know that product was in America. They don't have to tell anybody anything. Now, the argument made by Senator Harkin is they have to put a label on the product. That's a good thing. We also find out that sometimes the ingredients that are listed aren't the actual ingredients. I won't get into that. It's a whole other issue that the FDA is working on. But that isn't enough. You ought to see some of the claims that are being made on the labels of these dietary supplements. They are preposterous. Not for all of them. Some of them are basic and good, but some of them go way overboard. Don't we owe it to consumers across America to give them the basic information, to at least let them know we know the name of the company and the ingredients and the product being sold? Some people say that's just too much to ask. They ought to be able to sell whatever they want in America and never tell a soul. I don't buy it. I think we have a responsibility in Congress to protect these families. I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Just one minor correction I would make, and that is that under DeShay law, that the FDA must approve any health claims made by any dietary supplement or vitamins. And the only health claims that they can make are structure function claims, but they have to be approved by the FDA. I just want to clear up that point. I would also say further that I honestly don't know of any vitamin or supplement out there that's out in the market now that is dangerous to you if taken as directed. If taken as directed. As I said, anybody can abuse things. But if taken as directed, I quite frankly don't know of any supplement out there that is dangerous. Quite frankly, if taken as directed, they help you maintain your health and keep you healthy rather than being injurious to your health. I yield.
Mr. Vaney?
3 minutes.
I'll just close. I thank the senator from Iowa. He will acknowledge, I hope, that no one tests dietary supplements. No one tests them. The companies that make these products may test them if they wish. There's no requirement under law that they test them. And there's certainly no agency of government that tests the dietary supplements. So to say they're perfectly safe as they instruct you to take them on the label, how would you know that? How could you possibly know that? There's no testing involved. When it comes to prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs, there's testing involved. And at least we can point to the test to say whether it's safe, whether it's effective. Dietary supplements, a whole different world. And I will just tell you, if we are conscientious enough on behalf of consumers to limit the amount of caffeine that you can put in a cola, and then a company like this Monster drink company decides to call theirs a dietary supplement, not a beverage, not a food, no holds barred, they can put as much as they want in. That's why that poor girl died. 2 Monster energy drinks, 480 milligrams, I believe, of caffeine, and she died from cardiac arrest. Is it too much to ask that we know the ingredients and know the company? The next time there's another tragedy, I would like to be sure that we can say we at least made this modest, tiny, small step forward to say to the industry, if you're a good actor, don't be threatened. But when it comes to bad actors and things coming in from overseas, we're going to make you show up and at least identify who you are and what you're selling. Period. That's it. So at this point, I yield the floor and yield back the balance of my time. Suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Iowa.
As for further proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Again, Mr. President, I have to ask, how much time left on the bill for both sides?
Majority has 19 minutes. Minority has 29 minutes.
29 minutes. Okay. Again, I see that Senator Sanders is on the floor, and I assume ready to call up his amendment. I yield the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your hard work on this legislation, for the opportunity to talk about what I consider to be a very important amendment.
You need to call up your amendment.
The amendment is, I would like to call up amendment number 2109.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Vermont, Mr. Sanders, proposes an amendment number 2109. At the end of Title 11, add the following. Section, conditions.
I would ask that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection.
This amendment, to my mind, is an extremely important amendment, and it has the support of some of the major consumer organizations in our country, including Public Citizen, U.S. PIRG, the Consumer Federation of America, Consumers Union, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, and the National Women's Health Network. These really are some of the large consumer organizations that are in America, representing tens and tens of millions of our people. Mr. President, when we talk about prescription drugs, it's important to understand that in our country, we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. That's simply the reality. And that causes enormous problems because millions of our people go to the doctor writes a prescription, and then the person can't afford to fill that prescription. So that's pretty crazy because doctors are doing the diagnosis, telling the patients what they need. Patients can't afford to pay for the drugs because they're the highest prices in the world in this country. So, Mr. President, this is an issue that we have got to deal with. Now, there are a number of reasons why prices in this country are higher than in Canada, Europe, Scandinavia, and certainly one of them is that we are the only major country on earth that doesn't have a national health care program so that the government can negotiate prices with the drug companies. So what happens in this country is the drug companies simply charge us what the market will bear, any price they can come up with by which they can make money. And the end result is that we pay, in 2009, prices in this country were 85% higher than Canada, 150% higher than France, Italy, Sweden, and Switzerland, and so forth and so on. But the reason the drug prices are high in this country is not just that we don't have a national health care program. It's because of the enormous amount of fraud that takes place within the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, every single year, the major drug companies are ripping off the American people to the tune of billions of dollars a year because of fraudulent practices. Well, I do not have enough time here today to recite every example of fraud that have been caught and prosecuted in the last 10 years. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my full statement, which catalogs a longer list of the most egregious examples. But here is the bottom line, and I am going to list some of the cases of fraud. Virtually every major pharmaceutical company in this country has either been convicted of fraud, i.e. ripping off federal government, state government, or individuals, or else has reached a settlement. And we have got to get a handle on this crisis. Now, I want to read. I'm going to bore some people because it's a long list. Sadly, it is a long list. But it's a list that has to get out, and it is an issue that we have got to deal with. So here we go. Abbott Labs is one of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies in the world. It had $38.8 billion in revenues and $4.7 billion in profits in 2011. Just last month, Abbott reached an agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice to pay $1.6 billion for illegally marketing the anti-seizure drugs Depakote. I may be pronouncing that wrong. According to the New York Times, quote, as part of the agreement, Abbott said that it would pay $800 million to resolve civil cases brought by federal and state authorities, $700 million in criminal penalties, and $100 million in states in connection with consumer protection matters. That was just last month. They're going to pay $1.6 billion. In 2010, 2 years ago, Abbott and two smaller companies collectively agreed to pay $429 million to settle charges that they deliberately misreported drug pricing in order to hike reimbursements from Medicare and Medicaid. That's Abbott. Just recent years. Pfizer is the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, $67.9 billion in revenues and $10 billion in profits in 2011. Pfizer. In 2012, this year, Pfizer allegedly avoided paying hundreds of millions in rebates due to state Medicaid programs for Prontonix. Pfizer holds 4 different exclusives for Prontonix. Talks are underway with the U.S. Department of Justice to settle the charges for up to $2 billion. And this is for ripping off Medicaid. In 2009, Pfizer agreed to plead guilty to a felony of misbranding Bextra with the intent to defraud or mislead, and quote, and to pay $1 billion to resolve allegations under the civil false claims. 2004, a division of Pfizer pled guilty to 2 felonies and agreed to pay $430 million to settle charges that it fraudulently promoted the drug Neurontin for a string of unapproved uses. Johnson & Johnson is the second largest pharmaceutical company in the world, which had $65 billion in revenues and almost $10 billion in profits in 2011. In 2012, this year, Johnson & Johnson illegally marketed Risperdal, an antipsychotic medication, to nursing home patients and paid over $2 billion in fines, which constituted a mere 6.3% of sales revenue from the drugs. 2010, 2 subsidiaries of Johnson & Johnson illegally marketed the epilepsy drug Topamax for off-label psychiatric uses. Okay, that's Johnson & Johnson. Now we go to Merck. Merck is the 3rd largest pharmaceutical company in the world. In 2011, last year, Merck pleaded guilty to a criminal misdemeanor charge for violation of Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and paid a $950 million settlement for illegally promoting Vioxx for rheumatoid arthritis before that use was approved. In 2011, Merck will pay the state of Massachusetts $24 million to settle claims that former subsidiary Warwick Pharmaceuticals reported inflated and false prices for asthma medications, causing the state's Medicaid program to overpay. 2008, Merck reached a $670 million settlement for fraud on patients and Medicare, Medicaid, involving a conspiracy with hospitals to give the elderly cheaper drugs but charging them for the more expensive product. That's Merck. Now we'll go to GlaxoSmithKline. GlaxoSmithKline is, again, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, made profits of almost $44 billion in 2011. GlaxoSmithKline in 2011 announced that it had reached, quote, an agreement in principle, end quote, with the U.S. government to pay $3 billion to conclude the company's most significant ongoing federal government investigation, specifically illegal sales and marketing practices in Colorado and Massachusetts, overcharging the Medicaid rebate program, and illegal development and marketing of Avandia, a diabetes drug. 2006, GlaxoSmithKline agreed to pay $14 million to settle allegations that it engaged in patient fraud. 2005, GlaxoSmithKline paid $150 million to settle claims it overcharged the government for 2 anti-nausea drugs. 2003, GlaxoSmithKline signed a corporate integrity agreement and paid $88 million in a civil fine for overcharging Medicaid. And on and on and on it goes. So when we talk about the high cost of health care, when we talk about the fact that the United States has the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, it is important for us to address the crisis in terms of fraud within the pharmaceutical industry and the fact that virtually every major drug company has been found guilty of fraud or reached a settlement in terms of fraud charges. Mr. President, in 2010, the pharmaceutical industry achieved a dubious distinction. It surpassed the notoriously corrupt defense contracting industry in defrauding the government. The pharmaceutical industry accounted for nearly half, $1.8 billion of a total of $4.1 billion of the penalties collected in 2011 by the Department of Justice, Health and Human Services Health Care Fraud and Abuse Control Program. In 2012, and this is really quite amazing, the pharmaceutical industry is expected to pay out up to 4 times the amount of last year's penalty, between $8 to $9 billion. $8 to $9 billion in penalties due to pending fraud settlements with the Department of Justice. And those are the penalties for fraud that has been discovered. Who knows what type of fraud is taking place on behalf of the drug companies that has not been discovered. So let me recapitulate. Virtually every major drug company has either been found guilty of or settled charges of significant fraud over the last 10 years. The question arises, and this really is an important question, is fraud within the pharmaceutical industry the exception? Does it just happen here or there, or is it simply put their business model? Is fraud the business model of the pharmaceutical industry, who think that in most cases they can get away with the fraud, make huge profits, and in some cases when they get caught they will in fact pay a penalty, but the penalty will in no way match the kinds of huge profits they're making from their fraudulent activity. Now, the question that the Senate has got to address is, do we look away from this issue? Do we ignore this issue? Or do we finally address the very important issue of fraud within the pharmaceutical country, fraud being practiced by virtually every major drug company in our country? Since it is obvious to anyone paying attention to the prevalence of pharmaceutical industry fraud, that it is obvious, I think, that the prevalence of pharmaceutical fraud, it is clear that the punishments that we now have on the books have not done enough to address this problem, because apparently the drug companies are not too intimidated by the laws on the books. They think it makes business sense for them to continue going forward on their fraudulent activities. The amendment that I am offering would send a strong and clear message to the drug industry. Illegal behavior will not be rewarded with continued government-granted monopolies. There are some things, patient safety, the devotion of scarce public resources to provide health care to needy patients, that are more important than drug company profits. This amendment is designed to effectively deter pharmaceutical fraud by making government-granted monopolies contingent on good corporate behavior, and I think that is the least that we can do. Mr. President, this amendment would penalize any instance of pharmaceutical fraud resulting in a civil or criminal judgment or a settlement with an acknowledgement of fault by revoking any applicable data or marketing exclusivity for the particular drug or product involved in the fraud, giving pharmaceutical companies another factor to consider when weighing whether or not to violate the law in their sales or billing practices. So, if a company violated federal or state law by inflating the price of a drug in Medicare or Medicaid billing, or illegally marketing a medication, under my amendment, that company would lose the remainder of any exclusivity period for that medication. Companies would be required to self-report qualifying violations to the FDA within 30 days. So let me conclude, Mr. President, by saying this. Our people are paying the highest price.
The senator's time has expired.
I would ask unanimous consent for 1 minute more.
Without objection.
Thank my colleagues. Our people are paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. One of the reasons is widespread fraudulent activity on the part of virtually every major drug company in our country. It is no longer acceptable to turn a blind eye to that crisis. The time to act is now. This amendment will go a long way forward to ending that outrageous fraud, and I would ask the support of my colleagues for this amendment. I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, I appreciate the concern by the senator from Vermont. but I have to oppose the amendment number 2109 because of some of the unintended consequences it will have. This amendment would require drug companies to forfeit exclusivity for certain violations of the Federal Drug and Cosmetics Act and other laws. Exclusivity means exclusive market rights granted by the Food and Drug Administration upon approval of a drug to encourage people to develop drugs. It may or may not run concurrently with a patent. Exclusivity is a very important type of intellectual property protection. Without it, innovators can't predictably obtain returns on their drug development investments. The stated purpose of the amendment is to combat health-related fraud. The premise is if companies know their profits are at risk, they'll be strongly discouraged from engaging in fraudulent activity. But this amendment is counterproductive. It'll make it more costly for law enforcement to fight fraud and could hurt patients. Congress is also thinking of ways to improve health care anti-fraud programs. For example, in a recent open letter to the health care community, 6 members of the Finance Committee, led by Chairman Baucus and Ranking Member Hatch, announced a bipartisan effort to solicit ideas from the health care community on ways to reduce health care waste, fraud, and abuse. Estimates of the amount of fraud and misspending in Medicare and Medicaid vary widely from $20 billion to as much as $100 billion. To address this problem, the 6 senators solicited ideas on program integrity and fraud and abuse enforcement reforms. This sort of constructive search for real solutions is long overdue. Healthcare fraud is a serious problem, and I strongly agree that Congress should develop substantive solutions to it. The problem here is that the pending amendment does not really tackle the problem of fraud. Instead, the amendment uses a blunt instrument, revocation of exclusivity, to punish an incredibly broad range of legal violations. The amendment would discourage settlements in fraud cases. A settlement agreement, which is mostly what was listed there, concerning a listed violation would trigger forfeiture. If a company knows that the settlement would trigger a result that could cost it hundreds of millions of dollars or billions, it would be less likely to settle. This will make it harder for the government to settle cases and increase the backlog of cases waiting for trial. It also creates the risk that a fraudster would prevail or appeal and prevent the prosecutor from pursuing other cases. Settlement's an important tool in a prosecutor's toolkit. It enables them to pursue a higher volume of cases while still obtaining sizable judgments to deter future fraud. In fiscal year 2011, the Department of Justice and Health and Human Services together recovered nearly $4 1/10 billion in taxpayer dollars through health care, anti-fraud prevention, and enforcement efforts. The ability to settle claims contributed substantially to this achievement by allowing the government to pursue a higher volume of cases. Within the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act itself, there are already robust standards and enforcement tools concerning industry marketing and communications and interactions with health care providers and professionals. The False Claims Act and strong anti-kickback laws are also on the books already. The amendment will also discourage manufacturers from developing new cures. It creates tremendous uncertainty about whether investors can obtain returns on their drug development investments if a trivial violation of FDA's detailed, elaborate regulations could put the entire investment in a drug at risk. It will discourage investment in new treatments. This would severely threaten biomedical investment and jobs. More importantly, it would lead to fewer life-saving therapies for patients. This amendment could produce absurd results. For example, the amendment would revoke exclusivity for a civil judgment considering adulteration of a drug. A drug is considered adulterated if a manufacturer violates FDA's current good manufacturing practices known as GMPs. There is no intent requirement and no minimum number of inspection requirements that would trigger that liability. Some examples of the violations include washing and toilet facilities are not easily accessible to work areas. Adequate lighting is not provided in all areas. Laboratory records do not include complete records of the periodic calibration of laboratory instruments. So it obviously doesn't make sense to strip drug companies of exclusivity for violations like this, which do not reflect fraudulent intent. It is disproportionate and it's counterproductive. Again, I strongly agree with that health care fraud is a significant problem. The best way to solve it is through a robust enforcement of the current laws on point and continuing to work with the healthcare community to find effective solutions. And that would be going through some committee hearings as well. The pending amendment would not reduce fraud. On the contrary, it would frustrate the government's current anti-fraud efforts and ultimately harm patients and taxpayers alike. So I would encourage a no vote on this amendment. I would yield the floor and reserve the balance.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
I'd ask unanimous consent the pending amendment be set aside and Coburn Amendment 2131 be called up.
Mr. President,
The Senator from
I
Iowa.
right to object. How much time is left on the Sanders amendment?
The Senator from Vermont has no time left. The Senator from Wyoming controls 10 minutes.
Would the senator from Oklahoma withhold? We have some people who want to speak on this. Once the time is run, then we automatically move on to another amendment, and we can bring up the senator's amendment at that point.
Well, it's my understanding that the time is under our control. At the present, there's 10 minutes left.
Well, there's 10 minutes in opposition to the amendment.
Well, I'd be happy to yield to the ranking member. If he has people that want to speak in opposition, that's fine.
Tulsky was here earlier and just wanted to speak on this amendment. If we just wait 5 minutes, we can get to that.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, first of all, I want to thank my colleague for Oklahoma for this. I just wanted to take a few minutes, if I could, to talk about an important issue. I guess you don't want me to talk about this.
I'm sorry, I was wrong. I thought the senator wanted to speak on the Sanders amendment, but you wanted to speak on the underlying bill itself.
Yes.
And the senator just wishes for 5 minutes?
Yes. Or less.
I would, since it is my time, I would yield the senator from Maryland 5 minutes on the underlying bill.
And I'll be very brief, though the
Senator
issue,
from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And to our colleague from Oklahoma, himself a physician, he would be very keenly interested in this issue of prescription drug shortages. This is a problem that's been brought to my attention by Marylanders, leaders of great institutions like the University of Maryland and Hopkins, as well as family members who care for someone and find that though there's been the right diagnosis and there's even the right drug to care for that problem, like the dreaded cancer word, the drug is not available. So you can imagine the worst thing that you want to hear is that your child has cancer, and then the worst thing you want to hear is that there's a shortage of that drug to take care of that child. Not because it hasn't been developed, not because it hasn't been a scientific breakthrough, but because there's been a manufacturing problem, or because the company stopped making the drug when it was no longer profitable, or when it was no longer profitable. Mr. President, that is inexcusable, and the bill before us does something about it. I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be included in the record, but I just want to make a few points. That in 2011, we had more than 250 drug shortages. That's not incidents. That's 250 drugs that were on shortage. And half of the drugs experience a shortage that goes into multiple times. This drug shortage threatens public health by preventing patients and physicians from accessing needed medications. It forces doctors to often delay medical procedures, use alternative products that carry unwanted side effects, to rely on foreign versions of drugs that might not have been reviewed by FDA, or it sends their very able pharmaceutical pharmacists in their institutions to spend endless hours and hours and hours on the phone to be able to come up with the needed drug. As I said, this was brought to my attention by letters. Some famous constituents, meaning well-known in our community with great health insurance, who had a child who had leukemia and then found the drug was in short supply. We heard from doctors who were forced to delay or alternative treatments, hospitals scrambling to manage these shortages, pharmacists trying to track down needed treatments, and even then, we heard about gouging and we heard about a gray market. The gouging was for pumping up the price where there's a shortage, and then a gray market where you could go to buy these drugs, but they might not be the drug you wanted, or they might have been on somebody's shelf a long time and were flawed and even dangerous, or they hadn't been refrigerated. I could go through one horror story after another, but Mr. President, I wanted to bring this to the attention of the full Senate, because as we work on this excellent bipartisan bill on user fees, what we also have is a way for dealing in a very common sense way with the drug shortage issue. It has the support of the private sector and certainly those who care for patients as well as parents themselves. I hope we pass this underlying bill, and I hope we don't tie up this bill with amendments that could either derail or detour this bill. Mr. President, I thank my colleagues for being so generous. I yield the floor and thank them for their kind attention.
But how much time is remaining on the Sanders amendment?
There is 7 minutes in opposition remaining on the Sanders amendment.
Mr. President, I just yield myself a couple of minutes on that. I just want to join with my colleague, Senator Enzi, in opposition to the Sanders amendment. Look, we're all disturbed by a lot of what we're reading and these big settlements. I know the recent one a couple of weeks ago of Abbott Labs, where the part of the prosecution case was actually that this was part of their business model, and then they had to settle it. So this is all very disturbing. However, that cries out more for perhaps looking at the criminal charges and perhaps strengthening some of those things, but not taking away exclusivity. If you do that, a lot of times you could take away exclusivity from someone who just committed a misdemeanor. A lot of these settlements are misdemeanor charges where no intent has to be shown. And a lot of times, if you did this, then you might penalize someone who maybe had done something wrong in the past. Now maybe they've got new leadership, a new company, and reformed themselves, but then they still got to lose their exclusivity. You wouldn't want to do that. And third, if you do this, I think Senator Enzi pointed this out very correctly, if there's no reason to settle, then people are going to go to the wall on terms of defending themselves, and DOJ doesn't have all that kind of personnel and that time to do that, and I think we would then have even a worse situation of people committing fraud, because then they would know that they would not have any reason to settle whatsoever. Settlement is a good tool to be used by prosecutors to get cases to justice, to make sure that consumers are made whole, and to let people know that they're being watched in what they do. So I think the Sanders amendment, while maybe well-intentioned, I know it's well-intentioned. I know the senator has all good intentions, what he wants to do on this. But I think it goes too far and is not the right, solution to that problem. So I would oppose the Sanders amendment also. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oklahoma.
Thank you. I ask that the pending amendment be set aside and that Amendment 2131 be called up.
Without objection, clerk will report.
Senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, for himself and Mr. Burr, proposes an amendment number 2131.
I ask unanimous consent the amendment be considered as read. Let me first say
Without objection.
How proud I am of the chairman and ranking member and all the members of the Help Committee on this very difficult and complicated issue that they are bringing before us. FDA, having been in business and under the control of the FDA as a medical device manufacturer, this is a very complicated area of law that, if it's done right, will have tremendous positive effects on this company. And I think you've put out a very good bill, and I congratulate you and all the members on doing that. I have two amendments. I'm going to speak a very short period of time on both of them, and then I will work with the ranking member and chairman to see if we can't get them so we don't have to vote on them. Just a little history with PDUFA and MDUFA. The reason they were set up in the first place was to help fund FDA, and the reason the manufacturers agreed to do that was to get more timeliness in terms of the response to their applications. That was the whole basis for it. And what we have before us today is some improvement in terms of the FDA's response, but really not everything that we should have gotten. I, along with Senator Burr, asked for a GAO study to the FDA in terms of meeting stated performance goals. And we found out a whole lot about that. And that's my next amendment, but I say that to preface why I have this amendment. In this bill is a wonderful requirement that causes the FDA to contract with an independent management company to assess the management of the missions and resources of the device regulation component of FDA. What is missing is that same independent review in terms of drugs. And it's one of those things where we would invest in something that was going to pay us additional big dividends. I know it's going to pay us big dividends in the device area. It will also pay us big dividends in the drug area. And I don't know what the workings were of the committee, why they decided not to put this in as far as the drug review process, but having a second look at a very complicated regulatory and approval structure could be very beneficial in terms of improving both the quality of the outcome as well as the timeliness. So this amendment simply says that what we're going to do for the device in the bill already, we're also going to do for the drug side of the FDA. It's about gathering knowledge both for the FDA and for us as we help this agency perform very needed things. I read a lot about new science on new drugs as a physician. I want to tell you the things that are coming in this country are going to be phenomenal in terms of new treatments and new drugs and new capabilities. We need, in terms of our competitiveness worldwide, but also in terms of how we address these diseases, to have the most efficient regulatory agency we can. So all I'm asking is that we treat all of FDA the same in terms of taking a look. How well are they doing? What could they do better? How could they do it better? That report comes to us and the FDA. And so we can see the weaknesses. You know, we haven't been through every area of the FDA as members of the Senate. And to have an independent assessment of the drug side as well as the device side will pay huge benefits to the FDA, but mostly it will pay huge benefits to the people of this country in terms of timeliness of drug presentation. So with that, I won't speak any more to that. It's a common sense, good government amendment. Part of it's already in the bill, part of it's not in the bill. And it's something that will pay us big dividends, both in terms of health care, both in terms of improving the operation of the FDA, but also in terms of improving our competitiveness worldwide. I'd ask that that amendment be set aside and call up 2132.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
Senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, for himself and Mr. Burr, proposes an amendment number 2132. At the end, the title...
I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection.
This is an amendment that comes out of a study of GAO's findings. And GAO did a wonderful job looking at the FDA. And what we found out, part of it will be covered if, in fact, we do this other study on the management. But what GAO is telling us is there's an irregular pattern of performance review at the FDA. About 40% of the people who are involved in the drug and device approval process, part of their evaluation in terms of their performance review has to do with the timeliness of their work product. And it's only a small component, but it's yet still a component of it. And what this amendment does is just said, FDA, make this a part of your component on the people that are actually reviewed in the review process. not to try to push them to do it better, but to have a management tool with which to evaluate individual employees doing this. The fact that they're already doing this on some, and what GAO really said is just a lack of management effectiveness that they haven't installed it everywhere else. All this amendment says is this should be a component as they evaluate their employees that are associated with the review, as one component of their performance review. How did you do on timeliness? Was your work product timely? The idea behind this is not to push drugs out that shouldn't be approved. It's not to push out devices that shouldn't be approved. But remember the purpose for PDUFA in the first place, and MDUFA. The purpose was to fund FDA with additional money so that they would be more timely. The opposition that I hear to this amendment is that we're afraid if this is a component of review that they might review a product and let it go when it shouldn't. Doesn't make sense since already 40% of the employees that are doing this are being evaluated on this performance standard anyway. So I would raise the question, if we're in opposition to this amendment, why in the world haven't we eliminated this as a part of all the review process already, if in fact it's a concern? And there isn't a concern with it. It's a good management tool. It's used in all other sorts of government agencies, and I would commend and ask unanimous consent to put the GAO report in the record that backs up exactly what I'm saying and their recommendations. These aren't Tom Coburn's recommendations. These are the GAO recommendations for FDA. And they address the concerns of inappropriate pressure for early approval or inappropriate approval for drugs or devices. So again, it's good government, it's common sense, it's how you would manage a private organization. You would put every component that the employee is involved with as a component of part of their review process. And my hope is that we don't have to vote on this, that when you actually thoroughly study the GAO report, you'll embrace what they're saying as common sense with sound judgment that will actually improve the FDA. And with that, I yield the floor.
Would the senator yield for a question?
Be happy to.
I think the senator is making a lot of common sense. The only question that I would ask is if, and I don't know a lot about this, I haven't read the GAO report, I'd be the first to admit, but if in fact every employee says, well, I know they're going to get me on this timeliness, so it's the balance of safety and quickness, safety and expediency. In other words, we try to get a balance. We want devices and drugs approved quickly as possible, but we don't want to jeopardize safety. Those are the two things we always try to balance in here, and safety being the foremost. We want things to be safe. I guess I asked the question, would enshrining this in law rather than in administration, would this somehow put more undue pressure on reviewers and things to do something quickly and jeopardize the safety aspect?
Well, my answer to the chairman through the chair is the FDA does nothing quickly now. And he knows that because he's been sitting in oversight over them for years. That's number one. Number two, the answer to that is they have no explanation, if you'll read the GAO report, on why they do it on some employees and not others. So the fact is if this is a bad thing, why are they doing it on 40% of the employees now? It's not. The number one and number two things that the FDA is charged with is safety and efficacy. Safety and efficacy. Safety comes first. They get graded on how well they do on that. So you have this counterbalance. But what we have is a lack of responsiveness, even though billions of dollars are going to the FDA from the device companies and the drug companies. Part of the deal is to make them more timely. And that means in no way do you ignore safety, and in no way do you ignore efficacy. The fact is they do deserve answers. And what has happened is a lot of times they're not. I fully support the bureaucracy of the FDA in terms of doing their job. I think they do an awfully good job. They're just awfully slow at it. And when you ask why, there's not a good answer. And so the point is if there's a large number of employees that are already reviewed as a small component, it doesn't have to be a major one, but it ought to be something you think about is, you know, do I push this one off my desk because I'm bored with it? Does the time frame mean anything? We're not going after eliminating safety and efficacy. We're going after smart management. And those two things, safety and efficacy, reign supreme at the FDA. That's why we spend so much in this country. That's why most of the drugs are approved outside of this country way ahead of when they get approved here, because our drugs and devices are safer. And we're slow to approve, and rightly so, but we shouldn't be like frozen ice slowly slipping down a hill. And all this says is let's make one component of many in terms of the review, do it. And it's not my, again, I'd tell the chairman, this is not my recommendation. This is the GAO's recommendation. And so I would appreciate the consideration by the chairman and ranking member for these amendments. I think they're common sense. We can look at them again if you think there's a problem. We can put a caveat. Let's look at it in a year and say, have there been problems because we've done this? But it is good management. It does make sense. And they already are doing it on 40% of their employees who are involved in the approval of both drugs and devices. And I thank the chair for his question, and I yield the floor, and I will be back.
The senator from Iowa.
I rise for the purpose of calling up Amendment 2129.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Senator from Iowa, Mr. Grassley, proposes an amendment number 2129.
I ask that we suspend the reading of the amendment.
Without objection.
Mr. President, first of all, I congratulate my colleagues my colleague from Iowa and colleague from Wyoming for the bipartisanship of this legislation. The FDA amendments of 2007 mandated basic public results reporting for all clinical trials supporting FDA-approved drugs and devices. Clinical trials result help both patient and doctors understand the benefits and efficacy of a particular medical product. Moreover, a July 2011 FDA report stated, quote, understanding variable characteristics in clinical trial sites is becoming increasingly important because of the international nature of current clinical trials. The sources of differences in efficacy results between United States and foreign clinical trial sites have yet to be determined, but differences rooted in the conduct of the clinical trial should be evaluated, end of quote. It has been 5 years now since the passage of the FDA Amendment Act, and the National Institute of Health is still in the process of writing proposed regulations. The clinicaltrials.gov program and the Title VII of the FDA Amendments Act were considered major reforms and health science information advances. If they're not being implemented well or adequately enforced, society will fail to reap full benefits of the billions of dollars in good medical science research. This amendment before the Senate will impose a deadline by which the NIH will finalize both the proposed and final regulations. Further, 2 years after the regulation has been in place, the Government Accountability Office will conduct a study on compliance with the regulations and will look at, among other things, whether the applicable clinical trial is conducted domestically, in foreign sites, or in a combination of sites. The rapid increase in trials being run overseas makes it imperative that the Government Accountability Office investigate this matter. Currently, Currently, 80% of approved marketing applications for drugs and biologics contained data from foreign clinical trials. And the FDA inspected 1 9/10% of domestic clinical trial sites and 0.7% of foreign clinical trial sites. We need stronger reporting requirements to ensure that we understand what the implications are of this move to having so many trials conducted overseas. I encourage my colleagues to support this important amendment. Before I move on, I'd like to talk about another amendment that I'm a co-sponsor of. The amendment offered by Senator Portman that will make dangerous synthetic drugs like K2 and bath salts Schedule I narcotics. I've worked for over a year now to get this legislation passed through the Senate after a constituent of mine named David Rozga committed suicide shortly after smoking K2 with some friends now nearly 2 years ago. I introduced the David Mitchell-Rozga Act in March of 2011, and the Senate Judiciary Committee unanimously passed it out of committee along with 2 other related bills sponsored by Senator Schumer and Senator Klobuchar last July. Since that time, the use of synthetic drugs has grown very rapidly, with a number of calls into poison control centers going from as few as 19 in the year 2009 to over 6,000 in the year 2011. The House passed their version of this bill last December on a strong bipartisan vote, but one senator has blocked consideration of this legislation in this chamber up to now. And so I'm grateful that we're finally able to have a vote on this issue, and I would urge passage of the Portman amendment as well. Madam President, I'd like to go to another amendment if that would be appropriate at this time.
Without objection.
I would call up Amendment 2121.
The clerk will report.